friend of ours, Rick Derringer.
Legendary guitarist and musician Rick Derringer, known for his unforgettable hits from the 60s and 70s. He had just turned 18 and he and his band...
The screaming guitar riff cut through the smoky air of the recording studio as Rick Derringer's fingers danced across the fretboard one final time. He didn't know it then, but those would be the last notes he'd ever play. The man who gave the world rock and roll Hoochie Koo was about to face his greatest performance, saying goodbye. Rick wasn't supposed to be a rock legend. Growing up in small-town Ohio, he was just a kid with calloused fingers and a beat-up guitar, practicing until his neighbors complained. His bedroom walls were covered with pictures of guitar heroes, Buddy Holly, Chuck Berry, Link Wray, men who made six strings sing like angels and scream like demons. While other teenagers were throwing footballs, Rick was learning to bend strings until they cried. His mother would peek into his room at midnight, finding him curled up with his guitar like other kids slept with teddy bears. The calluses on his fingertips told the story of a boy possessed by rhythm and blues. At 17, Rick gathered his high school friends in his parents' basement. They called themselves the McCoys, not because they dreamed of stardom, but because making music together felt like breathing. When they stumbled onto Hang On Sloopy, everything changed overnight. One day, they were nobodies from Union City, Ohio. The next, they were on Ed Sullivan, watching America dance to their sound. Rick thought he'd cracked the code, that this was just the beginning of a golden road. But the music industry is a beast that devours its young. As the psychedelic 60s crashed into the 70s, the McCoys became yesterday's news. Record executives stopped returning calls. Concert venues grew smaller, crowds thinner. By 25, Rick was already being called a has-been, watching newer bands claim the spotlight he'd briefly held. The golden boy had tarnished, but his fingers never forgot how to make magic. Night after night, Rick dragged his amp into dive bars where beer-soaked floors stuck to your shoes, and the smoke was so thick you could taste it. He played to truckers, drunks, and dreamers, anyone who'd listened to a man trying to resurrect his career one chord at a time. In a cramped studio in 1973, with sweat dripping onto his Stratocaster, Rick laid down the track that would define him forever. Rock and roll, Hoochie Koo wasn't just a song. It was his declaration that he was still alive, still fighting, still believing in the power of three chords and the truth. The years rolled by like tumbleweeds. Rick became the guitarist other musicians called when half his talent sell millions of records. But Rick kept his head down and his amp turned up, knowing that longevity meant more than celebrity. December 2024 arrived like an unwelcome visitor. Rick sat in Abbey Road Studios, the same rooms where the Beatles had made history, preparing to lay down guitar tracks for a young band's debut album. His weathered hands, scarred by decades of strings and stage lights, wrapped around his favorite Stratocaster. But something was wrong. The fingers that had moved like lightning for over 5 decades began to tremble. The arthritis that had whispered threats for years now screamed demands he could no longer ignore. As younger musicians watched in uncomfortable silence, Rick struggled to hold his pick steady. The man who'd taught generations how to make a guitar weep couldn't make his own hands obey. Each attempted chord became a battle between will and flesh, between the music trapped in his mind and the body that was betraying his deepest gift. The session ended early. Rick packed his guitar with shaking hands, knowing something fundamental had shifted. 3 days later, in a sterile hospital room that smelled of disinfectant and despair, Rick stared at his Stratocaster leaning silently against the wall. Machines beeped around him like a mechanical rhythm section he never wanted to join. His hands, those magical appendages that had conjured rock and roll Hoochie Koo from thin air, lay still on white sheets. For the first time in his life, Rick Derringer couldn't play guitar. The silence was deafening. Rick Derringer passed away quietly on May 26, 2025, surrounded by gold records that caught the winter light streaming through hospital windows. His favorite Stratocaster rested beside him, its strings finally silent. In those final weeks, visitors expected bitterness about missed opportunities or industry politics. Instead, they found a man at peace, smiling as he remembered the teenage garage band that conquered America, the electric moment when Hoochie Koo first exploded from studio monitors, and the countless faces that lit up whenever that immortal opening riff filled concert halls across the world. Rick had lived exactly as he'd dreamed, a life completely devoted to the music that chose him as surely as he chose it. His hands were still, but his legacy lived in every power chord, every blues bend, every kid who picked up a guitar and felt electricity flow through their fingertips. True success, Rick learned, isn't measured in chart positions or Grammy nominations, but in the pure, uncompromising dedication to your craft, even when the world stops paying attention. Rick Derringer's legacy lives in every garage band practicing right now, every kid learning their first power chord, every musician who refuses to give up on their dreams. Don't let his story fade into silence. Share this video to honor the unsung heroes who shaped rock and roll, subscribe to hear more stories of music's forgotten legends, and remember, sometimes the greatest artists are the ones who simply never stopped playing, even when no one was listening. Rick's final gift to us all: proof that dedication to your art is the only applause that truly matters.